Chapter 5: Harmony and Friction. The first time they heard their own song come through a festival PA, it felt like standing in front of a mirror that had been blown up to the size of a building. Richard was on stage, guitar slung low, the June sun still hanging over the crowd in a wash of gold. Kelly stood a few feet away at her keys, a violin resting on a stand beside her. Around them, cables wound like vines, monitors hummed, and beyond the edge of the stage, a sea of faces stretched out, shifting and breathing as one body. They'd sound-checked that afternoon like they always did, careful, methodical. Richard plugged in, dialed the amp just warm enough to break up when he dug in. Kelly ran her patches, checking that the soft pads swelled, the pianos cut through, the strings floated without shrieking. They'd played these songs dozens of times in small rooms, but here, the sound came back at them in a new way. Bigger, bolder, less forgiving. When the house DJ faded out and the MC called their name, "Make some noise for Richard and Kelly," a wave of cheers rolled up. It wasn't deafening, not the roar of a household name, but it was real. People had come for them. Richard counted them into the opener, a tight mid-tempo groove, and felt the entire field fall into step. Heads started nodding from the front barrier all the way past the food trucks. The Oakland in him lit up. This was the test he'd always cared about most. Could the beat hold a crowd together in the open air? Then came Essence of Us. They placed it right in the center of the set, the way you put a hand on your own heart to remember it's there. By the time they reached that point, the sun had dipped lower, the lights softening into that hour where everything looks slightly more beautiful than it did an hour before. Richard began with a simple chord progression, unadorned, the guitar tone clean but warm. The groove this time was less about head nod and more about sway. Kelly came in with a gently pulsing pad, then her voice, opening on the title phrase, "What is the essence of us?" The crowd moved as one, a loose ripple across the field. Every time they played that song live, it reminded them that their chemistry wasn't just a studio accident. It was something people could feel in their bodies. Richard's grounded rhythm, Kelly's drifting melody, they braided together into something that made strangers close their eyes and lean into each other. On stage, that felt like an affirmation. Off stage, it made things more complicated. Success didn't arrive overnight, but it came quicker than either of them had expected. A few festival slots turned into more. Clips of their sets traveled online, grainy phone videos of choruses sung back to them, slightly out of tune. Comments from people describing how that song makes me feel like I'm floating, but also like held. Playlists picked them up, describing their sound with words they'd use themselves in private. Psychedelic soul, groovy, atmospheric, heart and haze. Their 10-song collection, Part of the Village, Under the Night Sky, A New World, Cycle of Ages, Rooted in You, Essence of Us, Who I've Become, Painting the Sky, Emerald Sky, Soaring Heights, circulated as an introduction, a portable map of the terrain they'd carved out together. With that attention came expectations. Interviewers wanted neat stories, who did what, who led, who followed. Promoters wanted bigger, louder sets. Labels and managers offered opinions about singles, about the sound, about which side of their spectrum should be pushed hardest. The music that had started as a conversation between two people was now being heard and interpreted by thousands. At first, that felt like a dream. They watched crowds grow, saw people waiting at the merch table with records and posters, shy smiles turning into stories about what their songs had carried people through, breakups, moves, long drives, long nights. Rooted in You got me through my dad's surgery, someone would say. A New World was what we played walking down the aisle, another would share. Every one of those stories deepened their sense of responsibility. The sound of us was no longer just theirs, but underneath the gratitude, a quieter tension began to whisper. In rehearsal one day, they were working on a new arrangement of Essence of Us for a festival where they'd been given a shorter set time. They needed to trim. "We can cut the second verse," Richard said, tuning between songs. "Go straight from the first chorus into the bridge. Keep the energy up." Kelly frowned, fingers resting on the keys. "But the second verse is where the whole mirror image comes in. It's important to the story." "People feel the chorus," he countered. "They sing that with us. I'm just thinking of the crowd. We don't want to lose them." She looked at him, bristling slightly. "Since when do we write around not losing people?" He sighed, rolling his shoulders. "Since we're playing to thousands, not 20 in a cafe. It's a festival, Kel. Different energy." She wasn't above considering the crowd. She'd learned to love the way a whole field could feel like a single listening organism. But part of her still held loyalty to the quieter, more meandering version of themselves, the one who had written under the night sky, without any thought of radio edits or set times. "Can we shorten the verse instead of cutting it?" she offered. "Hit the key image, then move?" They went back and forth, bartering seconds and lines like currency. It was a small disagreement, but it revealed a larger difference. Richard's instinct to protect the groove and momentum, Kelly's instinct to protect the mood and meaning. They found a compromise. A shorter verse, a slightly rephrased melody that landed sooner, but it left an echo. On the drive home that evening, Kelly stared out the window at the blur of highway trees, headphones in, but no music playing. Richard's voice from rehearsal lingered. "We don't want to lose them." For years, she'd written as if the listener was walking alone under a sky with her, as if the whole point was to get a little lost together. Now, there were crowds, and it was thrilling, but also disorienting. Was the essence of us changing, or just expanding? For Richard, different questions flickered. He'd spent so much of his life learning how to hold people in time, how to make rooms move. Festivals felt like the proof that all those hours had been worth it. Yet amid the bright lights and schedule sheets, he sometimes felt the subtle thread of compromise. Tight set times meant fewer deep cuts. Big crowds meant more pressure to keep energy up, less patience for experiments that didn't land. In quieter moments, they pulled those questions into their songs. Essence of Us became less just a love song and more a manifesto. When they wrote it, they weren't thinking about festivals. They were thinking about what sat at the center of what they did, beyond trends and expectations. The lyrics traced through images of roots and sky, pulse and drift, all the opposites they'd been weaving together since that first vineyard session. "What remains when the lights go down?" one line asked. "When the crowd goes home, are we still around?" On record, the song moved in that familiar mid-tempo way, a groove you could sway to without thinking. In the bridge, however, they allowed themselves to step out of time for a moment, drums dropping away, just guitar and reverb-washed keys, and their voices, almost bare. That section became their own check-in, night after night. On stage, as they sang those lines, they'd glance at each other. A small, silent question. Are we still in this for the same reason? Is the center holding? For a while, the answer was always yes. Then came Who I've Become. If Essence of Us was about the we, Who I've Become was about the I, that each of them was still, even inside the duet. The song started as a tension point. Kelly had been writing alone, in hotel rooms and on late-night flights, capturing fragments on her phone, short voice memos of melodies, and words that felt like they didn't quite fit the Richard and Kelly sound as it was currently understood. There was one progression that kept coming back, a slightly more angular set of chords, a bit moodier than their usual warmth, with a vocal line that dipped and rose in ways that felt more exposed, less blended. One afternoon, she sat in a soundcheck, quietly playing it on the house piano while the techs fussed with cables. Richard heard it from across the stage. "That's new," he said, coming over. "What's that one?" She hesitated. "Just something I've been working on." "Let's hear it." She played it through, singing the opening line. "I look in the mirror and don't know who I've become." The chords underneath shadowed the words, not offering easy comfort, but not abandoning them either. Richard listened, feeling a twist in his chest. The song wasn't blaming anyone. It wasn't a breakup song. It was a self-check, an honest look at how much had changed. Tour buses, interviews, schedules, and the fear of losing the quiet, exploratory person who used to play to fields and small rooms. He heard his own reflection in it too. Years of saying yes, of always being the reliable groove, had sometimes pulled him away from the kid who sat on the floor in front of the record player, learning songs by feel. The schedules, the meetings, the brand conversations, they were part of the job now, but not the reason he'd picked up a guitar in the first place. "We should do this one," he said firmly when she finished. Kelly looked up, surprised. "You really think it fits?" He nodded. "It's us. Or, it's you, but if it's you, it's us." They worked it into the repertoire, but carefully. Musically, Who I've Become sat closer to the contemplative end of their spectrum. The groove was there, but it was understated, almost reluctant. The drums came in late, after a long, bare intro of keys and voice. Richard's guitar took longer to find its place, answering phrases instead of leading them. The first time they played it live, at a mid-sized theater between bigger festival runs, The room went very still. They'd placed it after a run of more familiar songs, when the energy was high, and people were ready to sing along. Instead, Richard stepped back. Kelly moved to the piano alone, and the lights dimmed to a soft blue wash. "I want to try something a little different," she told the crowd, voice steady but low. "This one's about keeping track of yourself when everything shifts around you." Then she played. As the song unfolded, you could hear a pin drop. People didn't sing. They listened. The chorus, when it came, was haunting and direct. In the shadow of the lights, in the echo of the drum, I keep asking softly, "Is this who I've become?" When the last note faded, there was no instantaneous cheer. There was a beat of silence, heavy and full, then applause that rose from a deeper place than simple excitement. Backstage, friends and crew told them it was one of the most powerful moments they'd ever had on stage. Privately, it sparked hard conversations. If they were each changing, and they were, how did they make space for that growth inside a project built on their combination? Sometimes the friction showed up in arrangements. Richard would want to bring more of the hard-earned polish he'd learned from touring. Tighter intros, slicker transitions, songs running like a machine. Kelly would argue for leaving in a few rough edges, those awkward but human moments that made the music feel alive instead of perfect. Sometimes it appeared in decisions about side projects. Kelly was asked to score a small indie film, a slow-burning, atmospheric piece right in her wheelhouse. The director wanted her voice on the soundtrack, not just literally, but her specific sense of texture and space. It meant time away from the duo's schedule. Richard got offers to play on other artists' records, to bring his groove to different contexts. Part of him thrilled at the idea of stretching, of being just the guitar player again for a minute, without the pressure of holding the name. "Of course you should do it," he told her about the film. "That's your thing. Of course you should do those sessions," she told him. "Those are your roots." But unspoken questions lingered. Would their side paths pull them apart? Would individuality threaten the shared center their fans were growing attached to? Where did Richard and Kelly end, and Richard and Kelly begin? The truth was, the very things that made their music rich, their different impulses, their different origins, also made their partnership a constant act of negotiation. Yet time and again, live performance brought them back to the same ground. Standing on stages, from vineyards to clubs to festival fields, they could feel the reason they'd started this in the first place. When they launched into Cycle of Ages and watched a crowd move in a slow, collective wave, they remembered that their loops and patterns spoke to something deep in people. When they played Rooted in You and saw couples move closer, strangers put arms over each other's shoulders, they felt the anchor that song provided, to their listeners and to themselves. And when the setlist reached those core songs, Essence of Us, Who I've Become, the entire journey, highs and frictions, seemed to crystallize. On nights when they were slightly at odds, still carrying some unresolved disagreement about arrangements or schedules, those songs became a place to lay it down for a few minutes. During Essence of Us, as they sang about the center that held them, they often received their own answer. The chorus, "Strip it all away, what's left is the essence of us," landed differently when they were tired, when the road felt long. It wasn't a slogan, it was a question they were asking right then in front of thousands of people. During Who I've Become, when Kelly sang about the fear of losing herself, and Richard answered with a guitar line that wrapped around her voice like a quiet assurance, they were reminding each other that there was room for both the I and the we. Festivals, with their chaos and compressed set times, taught them how resilient their sound could be. Even when they had to shorten intros or shave off experimental sections, a strange thing happened. The core feeling of the songs survived. The vineyard haze still curled around the Oakland groove. The open sky still bent over the tight pocket. Back in smaller rooms, late-night club sets, intimate theaters, they stretched again. They'd extend the outro of A New World into long improvisational passages. Richard would lean into a repeating pattern, his right hand turning the guitar into a trance-inducing engine. Kelly would layer harmonies and strings, building a shimmer that felt like standing on that vineyard patio all over again, seeing the first hints of what they could do. In those elongated moments, the friction between structure and exploration softened. There was room for both. The crowd wasn't just watching. They were part of the experiment, part of the evolving us. As their fame grew, they realized something important. Harmony didn't mean the absence of tension. Harmony in music and in partnership, was about choosing how to resolve tension. Sometimes it meant yielding, Richard leaving a little more space than he instinctively would, Kelly letting a song land on a clear, satisfying cadence instead of drifting off. Sometimes it meant holding their ground and explaining why. There were hard nights, arguments that weren't about songs, but about the thousand small stresses of life on the road. Times when one of them wanted to cancel a commitment and disappear into quiet for a week, while the other felt compelled to keep pushing. But the work, the daily showing up, the writing, the rehearsals, the festivals, continued to pull them into alignment. They learned to name what they needed, just as clearly as they named keys and tempos. "I need a day where we don't talk about the next record," Kelly would say. "I need a set where we go hard on groove, no apologies," Richard would say. The more they honored those needs, the richer their shared sound became. In interviews, people asked them about their secret, how two distinct artists managed to merge so seamlessly, how they balanced the grounded soul of one with the dreamlike psychedelia of the other. They'd look at each other, sometimes with a little half-smile, knowing the real answer was messy and still in progress. Publicly, they'd say versions of the same truth. "We listen a lot," Richard would offer. "To each other, to the crowd, to the songs. The groove tells us what it needs. For silence, for surprise, for each of us to show up as we are that day. The atmosphere tells us what it wants to." Privately, they knew that the real essence of us wasn't any single track or moment. It was the ongoing cycle, meeting in a vineyard, building a sound, testing it in front of strangers, letting it change them, then bringing those changes back into the music. Harmony and friction, over and over, each pass around the loop adding another ring to the tree. As they stood side by side on yet another festival stage, thousands of miles and many shows away from that first improvised A New World, they could feel the history in their hands. Richard's fingers, shaped by Oakland sidewalks and park jams and a lifetime of grooves, wrapped around the neck of his guitar with the same grounded ease. Kelly's voice, shaped by Eugene skies and quiet pianos and a devotion to space, rose over the crowd with the same soft insistence. They were not the people who had first stepped into that vineyard. "Who I've become" was an honest statement for both of them. But as the crowd swayed and sang the chorus of Essence of Us back to them under the open sky, they knew this too. Whatever they had become, whatever they were still becoming, they were doing it inside a sound they'd built together. A sound that could hold both the groove and the drift, both the I and the we, both the harmony and the friction. And that, more than the size of the crowd or the slot on the festival poster, felt like success.